The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey, howdy ho, everybody. Coming to you cordless. It's Monday night, December 15th, 2025. It's 9:01 on the East Coast of the United States and 6:01 on the West Coast. And here where I'm sitting in Northeast Minneapolis, it's 8:01 Central Time. I'm Jim Peters. Welcome to another edition of Jim Peters Tonight. This is episode number 302. And you had to reset to 300, but you still should keep score at home. You should. How do I look? I look all right for an old dude. Any rate, hope you guys had a great weekend. You know, it was just cold as fuck here. I'm not kidding. The high temperature on Saturday, the high was 4 below zero. That's not the wind chill. That's no mamby pamby pussy wind chill. That was the actual temperature. It was 4 below zero. And the fact that it happened this early in the season, I mean, usually we had stuff like that in January, but it's not even halfway through December, and here the temperatures plummets. Now the irony is tomorrow, I think it was about 23 today. Tomorrow it's supposed to be 40. That's crazy. Just crazy stuff. Who's our guest tonight? Joanthan Lockwood. He's our guest. He's a military historian, military strategist, former U.S. Army colonel, and he's a co-host of the Ukrainian Show is what everybody calls it. Its actual name is Ukraine, Russia, China. It's a podcast twice a week. They do it on Tuesdays and Fridays. It's him, Sasha Stone from Canada, who's Ukrainian himself, and Ivan Kurchenko, who's actually in Kiev, in Ukraine. And that's the reason so many people pay attention to this podcast, is because they actually have somebody in Ukraine on the show on a regular basis. So we're gonna talk about the Ukraine thing. We're talking about how there's a lot of people think that Russia is going to start World War III in Europe, and I'm going to ask Joanthan about that because I'm just wondering if it's just war monitors trying to make money. I don't know. I'm kind of dragging today too. I gotta admit, I'm pretty tired. And then part two, we got JimCast for today, and I'm going to tell you why smelling your own farts is actually good for you. And I have to comment on, now this is not funny. I have to comment on President Trump's reaction to Rob Reiner, which has been actually universally panned by not only just liberals but conservatives too. And I have some comments on that. I have something to say that I haven't heard anybody say about it. So that's normally, I don't like to talk about stuff like that. But yeah, if I have a unique take on it, and I do, at least I haven't heard anyone else mention it, I bring stuff like that up. The JimCast is a part of the show where I try to talk about the news and no one else is talking about. Usually it's science stuff. Usually it has to do with little green men or gray aliens or something, but sometimes it's politics. So that's tonight. Tomorrow night, Gregory Wrightstone is going to be here. Second appearance on the show. He's the head of the CO2 coalition. I love these people because him and I are going to talk about climate change or the fact that it's BS. This might have been my position since this show started, even going back to my work at Conk News, and that is human-caused climate change is just a giant hoax. Now, global warming is real. The world is warming up, but humans aren't causing it, or at least they're contributing in a very minor way, however you want to call it. And his organization, Gregory Wrightstone's organization, they're dedicated to spreading that word. And finally, I'm reading stuff in the press that finally, people are starting to realize this is true. Finally. I mean, I look at this as the biggest single grift ever perpetrated on the American public, because for 20 years now we have had all sorts of fiscal programs, policies, all sorts of crap devoted to this thing that doesn't exist, and it doesn't. So him and I will talk about that, and also tomorrow night too. Second half of the show, open phones. Call me up, 325. Call Jim, 325-225-5546. You don't have to be watching. I mean, the second half of the show starts around 10 p.m. Eastern. About an hour. We're about an hour into it, so give me a call. And if you call up and we're not on the air yet, you can leave a message, and I'll play them back if they're interesting. So that's tomorrow. Wednesday, Julian Hagman's here. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Caring Professionals. But what he's really here to talk about is massive fraud in the state of New York, and Governor. Who's going to say Oja? No, but that's a former dictator of Albania. Oja, whatever. Anyway, he's going to be here. And we got double guests on Wednesday, and Corinne Clifford, her second time for her on the show too. She's a White House correspondent, and she's just a very interesting woman, and I love talking to her. So she's here. Thursday, you got a full slate of shows, and there's a reason for this. Thursday, Leslie Corbley's coming back, her second appearance on the show. She's just released a book on October 21st called Progressive Prejudice, Exposing the Devouring Mother. And I'll just read this from the description of the book. The devouring mother is the archetype of female predation. It is personified on the political left in modern feminism and hides behind compassion, victimhood, and presume moral purity. And do you get the impression that Leslie doesn't take any prisoners, man? Leslie's the only right-wing poet I've ever known. I've never heard of it. So the first time she was on the show, she told the story about going to, I think it was the Texas State Bar Convention. She was invited as a guest, and someone figured out she was a poet. Get up and read one of your poets, and she did, and it was about the fact that she's extremely pro-life, and she basically almost got barred from the bar association, disbarred. I mean, yeah, she's a good time too. And also on Thursday, Santa's going to be here. He's going to be joining us, Santa, and the reason is because that's going to be our last show before Christmas. We're taking the following 2 weeks off. I was going to do a show on Monday, but then I realized I thought Christmas was Friday. No, Christmas is Thursday, which means Christmas Eve is Wednesday, and no one's going to be watching. You guys are going to be shopping. I know what's going on. I know. So we're coming back on Monday, January 5th. Don't know who the guest is yet, but we're doing that. So that's our schedule coming up here. But coming up here in about 12 seconds is Joanthan Lockwood. Stay tuned and watch this, all right? Joining us from his home in Reston, Virginia, military strategist, former U.S. Army colonel, author, brilliant man, just generally, Joanthan Lockwood. Lockwood's here.
Gee, I can hardly wait to hear, after an introduction like that, I can hardly wait to hear what I'm going to say.
I know you're going to say something. I know that. Oh, yeah. So we have you on here to talk about the Ukraine war, because you are one of the three co-hosts of the Ukraine podcast. I call it the Ukrainian Show, but its technical term is Ukraine, Russia, China, right? That's correct. What it's actually called. You, Sasha Stone, and God, I'm going to... What's his name?
Okay. All right. I'll forgive you on the last one. Yes. Ivan Kurichenko.
And he's the guy that's actually in Ukraine.
Yeah, he is the one. We call him our man in Kiev.
Yeah.
He is the one. He has access to all of the videos that they make on the spot there, and all sorts of unique information that gives us pretty much a battlefield correspondence view.
That's right, and that's why you guys have such a unique take on the war too. So this morning, Martin Gurry in the New York Post wrote an article. First of all, he's got a couple of really interesting statistics here. He said that at the pace the Russians are currently advancing, it would take them 140 years to win the war, and they would lose 44 million lives.
He makes an excellent point. The current rate of attrition for the Russian army is absolutely unsustainable. And the Ukrainians very cleverly, and it's a great innovation in warfare that they've introduced, they have taken drone warfare to an entirely new level. The Ukrainians, quite literally, have a robot army of drones fighting in front of them.
Yeah.
And they don't have to directly engage the Russians, with manpower.
No.
They can counterattack, but this is just basically what they do whenever the Russians attack. The robot army essentially whittles them down, and then the Ukrainians counterattack and drive the Russians back, robbing them of whatever gains they had made, of a few yards or whatever. It's kind of, in some sense, it's an advanced version of World War I, where the opposing armies in the trenches, they fought over every pile of stones and every heap of bricks.
Yeah, they did.
And no man's land. Well, it's there is no real no man's land there, but it's essentially the Ukrainians have a very solid defensive line all along their eastern front, and the Russians are trying, or they drive their people forward, and the Ukrainians just kill them. Just pure and simple.
Well, you've said this before, that is, we should give the Russian army credit because they probably have the finest troop of mules in the world.
Their logistic systems has always been poor. I mean, had it not, as I pointed out in a previous podcast, had it not been during World War II, the United States providing Ford trucks to the Russian army, the Russians would have never have been able to drive the Nazis out of Russia, out of Soviet Russia, because the logistics capability would not have supported the sustained offensives that eventually were able to supply the offensives that drove the Nazis out of Germany. The Germans would have been able to hold out indefinitely.
Yeah. So Yuri says here, now, I don't put a lot of faith in him because he's just a stupid columnist, and you actually know this stuff. He still thinks that the Ukrainian, even though he basically agrees with you that the Russian army is screwed up, he still thinks the Ukrainians are losing. But I don't.
Which one is this?
This guy's named Martin Gurry in the New York Post. He's a fairly well-known writer, but that's what he is. He's a writer. He doesn't know what you know. So
and he obviously doesn't know the history of the Ukrainians and their ability to resist, and because the Ukrainians in World War II, they were able, without significant outside support, they were able to fight a guerrilla war against the occupying Soviet army once they came back through, and they were able to conduct a significant guerrilla war against the Russians until about 1954, 9 years after the end of World War II. And that also, by the way, not known by most in the West, because the West was very fearful in the early days of the Cold War. They were fearful of a Soviet offensive against NATO, and that NATO would not be able to resist it. And what they did not realize was that the Ukrainian resistance guerrilla movement was tying down significant Soviet forces. And the Soviets, in any case, had taken tremendous casualties during World War II, and they were still trying to recover from that. So, in the event, the United States, as a member of NATO, was successfully able to deter any potential Soviet offensive against NATO by the threat of massive retaliation. The nuclear, our strategy was massive retaliation. You take one step over the line, we hit you with every nuclear weapon we've got at a time and place of our choosing. And
right.
during that period, of course, the Soviets did not have the ability to strike the United States with nuclear weapons. They're only during the 1950s until 1957 when they successfully test fired their first intercontinental ballistic missile. which technically made the United States vulnerable to nuclear attack. But they could only attack the United States using their bomber force at high altitudes on one-way missions. And the United States had a really easy counter to that. When you have nuclear bombers on one-way missions coming in high altitude over the North Pole, are you kidding? We had something called the Nike Zeus, Nike Hercules.
Yeah.
Nuclear anti-aircraft missile with a nuclear weapon, with nuclear warhead.
When did we get the SR-71? That was like 61.
Oh, that the SR-71 came in the late 60s.
Oh, I thought it was early.
We had the U-2 that before it was the U-2.
U-2, that's right. But the U-2 wasn't actually a bomber.
No, it was the U-2 was a pure reconnaissance aircraft.
Right.
And it could for until Gary Powers was shot down, and that was by sheer luck on the part of the Soviets.
Yeah.
The U-2 could basically fly over Soviet territory.
Yeah, it flew at like 80,000 feet or something like that, right? Yeah. Which was
the Russians would fire their missiles, and the missiles would fall short.
Yeah, and that's what happened. They shot them down. It was just a barrage, and they just hit them by luck, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just by sheer massive numbers, but all these missiles were falling short, and it was almost comical. But in any case, back to now what we're talking about with the Ukrainians and their ability to resist the Russian invasion. Oh, they have amply demonstrated that they're able to do that. Now, recently, I noted that Zelensky has made a concession, or a minor concession. In other words, so say, okay, we won't apply for NATO membership.
Right. Correct. That's where they are right now.
And in exchange, however, what they want security guarantees that are guaranteed by the United States, by the Congress. They want Zelensky wants Congress to approve security guarantees pledging the United States support for Ukraine and to deter a Russian invasion. Now I would say that's the second best solution.
It's an ad hoc NATO, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it says, okay, you guys attack Ukraine, then that triggers something, the security guarantee, which is every bit as good as Article 5. And the European members of NATO would certainly be willing to join in, because now they've got the United States committed, as well as everything else. So he's
still not willing. They're still saying they don't want to give up any territory. But here's here's where I need clarification from you. Are they including Crimea in that? I mean, my understanding is, for all practical purposes, Russia has Crimea right now.
Well, they occupy Crimea,
right?
But Ukraine is not recognizing it.
Yeah, I understand that. Right. So, are they included? Are they? Would they be willing to formally give up Crimea or not?
Not that close to Ukraine territory proper. When you look at where Crimea is, at least until the Ukrainians have been succeeding in reducing the air defenses of Crimea and close to cutting off its supplies and taking out infrastructure within Crimea. Right now, you don't attack air defenses or reduce air defenses in Crimea just for the heck of it. Yeah, it is a prelude to the use of air power over Crimea. You reduce the air defenses, then you in effect have air superiority over Crimea, which is a necessary prerequisite in turn for the Ukrainians to launch a counteroffensive using whatever strategic reserves they've been able to put together. And they're not going to say what reserves they've put together, but they would be able to counterattack and cut off reinforcement and supplies to Crimea, have air superiority. That sets the stage for a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive into Crimea, which would force the surrender of the Russian occupiers, who would be cut off. They would be cut off, subjected to air attack, everything else. There's no way they would surrender. And that kind of an operational defeat for Russia, the loss of Crimea, which I contend is the true center of gravity in this entire conflict. If they do that, that would be an operational defeat significant enough to not only bolster political support from NATO allies and the United States, but it would compel the Russians to basically say, declare victory and go home.
Yeah. There's one thing that Guri did say in this article where he agrees with you, and that is, and you've talked about this many times in the past, about how he does not think, even if this war is technically ended and over, he doesn't think that Putin's actually going to give up. He thinks he'll be bugging Ukraine forever. But on the other hand, he brings up the point that Putin is 78. He probably doesn't have a lot of years left, because Guri thinks that when Putin passes away, the new regime in Russia won't give a crap about any of this.
They will be waking up and smelling the coffee.
Yeah.
They will be looking at this. They will take due note of the fact that they've taken such staggering casualties. They had a demographic problem before they launched this war. And it was basically the aftershocks of the Second World War's massive casualties, 25 million.
Yeah.
And almost a seventh of their population at the time.
Right. I mean, and easily the most of any country that lost, including Germany even, I think.
Correct.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union in World War II lost more people than all of the other allies put together.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, my God.
Put together. And so for the Soviet Union, they became a superpower, but it was I would say it was a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah.
And you know what King Pyrrhus of Epirus said about that, the original phrasing of the Pyrrhic victory. He was being congratulated on his victory against the Romans, which was a very costly victory. And he said at the time, if the gods see fit to grant us another such victory, we are undone. Yeah. We're finished. Yeah. And so this is what it is turning out for Russia. Yeah, I don't even think they're going to get a political victory, let alone a military one.
Right.
The cost is such that its after effects are going to cause Russia significant problems I would say, for the remainder of the 21st century.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Right now, they make much about their so-called alliance with China. Well, guess what? China's the senior partner in this little alliance.
Yeah.
Russia is the weaker junior partner.
Right.
More dependent upon China. And China has been displaying these new maps, which the Chinese have earmarked for themselves portions of Russian territory.
Oh, really? Oh,
yes.
That's interesting.
The Chinese have centuries-long grievances against the Russians. The territory and they just may well move into those areas with their own people, because the Russians really don't have the wherewithal to stop them.
Well, I've had other people on this show, who talk about the fact that, they think that China or that Russia is still a formidable enemy of the United States, and I've always
they are, but it's very brittle.
Well, here's the way I put it: China is a formidable enemy, and maybe China and Russia together are extremely formidable, but Russia alone, nah.
Boris Yeltsin, former Russian President Boris Yeltsin, in a speech to the Russian Duma in 1994, stated, and this tells you more than all you need to know. He stated, the only reason Russia is considered a great power is because its armed forces have nuclear weapons.
Yeah, well, that
is the extremely narrow foundation on which Russia claims its great power status.
Yeah.
And this is also, by the way, why when President Trump declared his Golden Dome project, which is essentially to provide it, it's basically the culmination of what was formerly the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Right.
Whereas the Strategic Defense Initiative, unknown to the Russians, was primarily research and development, not actual deployment.
Yeah.
In this, you actually have proposals laying out many, 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 many bucks to actually build a ballistic missile defense, which would effectively neutralize Russian and Chinese nuclear arsenals. In order to do that, based on my wargaming experience and my previous research, there is a hidden flaw in the Golden Dome, which could, in worst case, make the Golden Dome the 21st century version of the Maginot Line.
I don't know what that is. Sorry. What is that?
The Maginot Line?
Yeah.
The Maginot Line was created by the French after World War I. They did not want a repeat of the grinding trench warfare. They wanted something which would deter a future German invasion. And so, along the French-German border, they constructed a heavy fortified line of pillboxes, very sophisticated defenses, which could effectively repel any ground offensive against France across the French-German border. They also had a series of lighter fortifications extending along the French-Belgian border, which would help slow down a German offensive. Well, the problem is that they were assuming that the Germans would directly attack the Maginot Line or otherwise be deterred. And what the Germans did in World War II, especially for their offensive against France in May 1940, they bypassed it. They went through the Ardennes, through the heavily forested Ardennes, the same place where they would later attack in December 1944 in the Battle of the Bulge. They did it again.
And that didn't occur to the French?
No.
All right.
In short, no, it didn't occur to the French.
Okay.
And they paid a real heavy price for it. German occupation for most of World War II.
Hey, Joanthan, I've never asked you this. I know this is not your milieu, and if you want to laugh and call me crazy, that's fine. But there's
preemptive strike. You're nuts. Okay.
There's been rumors going on around for years that the Strategic Defense Initiative (SDI) that Reagan wanted to start wasn't just to repel the Chinese and the Russians, but it was also to repel visitors from outer space. Do you know anything about that at all?
That is ridiculous.
Okay, that's why
I just flat. That is ridiculous. What most people did not realize is that the Russians were terrified of SDI. They saw SDI as the culmination of what they were always afraid that the United States might adopt a nuclear warfighting, war survival, war winning strategy similar to their own. When Reagan came out with SDI, they saw that. Well, Reagan has gone and done it. He has created a nuclear warfighting strategy and capability. He wants to create that kind of capability for the United States. And they were looking for any indications that the United States was doing this. This was why, when I was a brigade intelligence officer, Brigade S2, for a composite Hawk and Patriot brigade in West Germany, when I was assigned there, and during 1985, my brigade commander said to me, Captain Lockwood, you read those Russian military journals. Look in those journals and see if the Russians are saying anything about Patriot. So I did. I looked in the January 1985 issue of Vestnik Protivovzdushnoi Obrony, Herald of Anti-Aircraft Defense. I looked in there, and I found in the back of the journal an article on U.S. medium to high altitude air defense systems. In the last third of the article, as I'm painfully translating the Cyrillic and the Russian, saw the Russian acronym PRO, Protivoraketnoi Obrony, anti-missile defense. The author was describing Patriot as an anti-missile defense system, an ABM system, capable, designed for strategic defense of the United States. Now, the United States had never said anything about using Patriot for strategic ballistic missile defense of the United States. And as a matter of fact, what was really interesting is that at that time, now I knew, because I had been talking to the contractors and supporting Patriot, that they said that Patriot at that time had a self-defense capability for air anti-missile defense.
Yeah.
The Patriot system at that time had an ABM capability for defending itself against short-range ballistic missile attack. That's all it had. It was very notional. Patriot did not even display an ABM capability until September 1987, when I read in the Army Times that The Patriot system successfully intercepts a U.S. Lance missile. They were demonstrating that, okay, yeah, Patriot has an ABM capability. But how did the Russians know that back in 1985?
Well, did they not? Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they were literally just guessing.
Well, here's how I figured out how they would have known from open sources. This is how they would have figured out that the Patriot had an ABM capability. Okay, the Safeguard anti-ballistic missile system, which the United States had briefly tried to deploy back in the early 1970s when Nixon authorized it. It was designed and built by the Raytheon Corporation. Okay, who built the Patriot system? Raytheon Corporation. What was the principal feature of the Safeguard anti-ballistic missile system? They had this huge phased array radars. It's like a gigantic pyramid with circles, a whole series of radars. And say, okay, that was what Safeguard had, phased array radar. What did Patriot have? Phased array radar, a smaller, more mobile version. So the Russians would have looked at that and said, aha, Patriot has an ABM capability. That's how they would have figured it out. And so it's plausible. But what they also did was they exaggerated. The Russians always have this tendency to exaggerate. They have this. They are terrified of the potential of U.S. technology.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, in the proof of that was in the book KGB: The Inside Story by Christopher Andrew and Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB defector. About page, it was in paperback, in page 687 of that book, Gordievsky talks about a KGB report that was sent to Gorbachev in April 1985. The report stated that the U.S. SDI system would eventually be able to block 80 to 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike, and there was no way that the Soviet Union could keep up with this capability. Now, I ask you, would SDI have been able to block 90% of Soviet missiles on a first strike back in the mid-1980s? No. But that didn't matter. The Russians believed it. They acted on that belief. Well, and they spent themselves into bankruptcy trying to counter this capability.
The other proof that they knew we were technologically far ahead of them is that when Soyuz and Apollo spacecraft docked in Earth orbit, and that was around the mid-1980s too, I know that the reports that came back were that the U.S. astronauts, the American astronauts, were shocked at the primitiveness of the Russian equipment, and I assume the opposite, that the Russians are blown away by how superior ours was. You know, this is the first time they'd ever seen it. You know.
Yeah, heck, the Russians should have been in the mid-90s would have believed, for example, when the movie Apollo 13 came out.
Yeah.
They would have been, because that was a replication of real life events, the Russians would be watching that movie and say, oh my God. And they would have been even more impressed about the ability of NASA's engineers to improvise solutions on the spot. Like with the square peg in a round hole with those two carbon dioxide filters.
Right.
It is an absolute marvel. It's been called the most amazing space rescue mission in history.
Oh yeah, they were
no lie. Yeah. And so, but all of this causes me to be very skeptical of any Russian claims of imminent victory, or where Putin may be willing to feed more Russian manpower into the meat grinder, but it is not going to improve his post-war situation, and it is certainly not going to compel the Ukrainians to surrender. So what the Ukrainians are doing, very skillfully, by the way, aside from continuing to innovate with their military, with whatever weapons they can get available and integrating them in an absolutely brilliant fashion, what they are doing is they are diplomatically doing this dance with the U.S. and saying, okay, we're not going to yield on this. And President Trump, he wants to be seen as a peacemaker. Okay. But in a recent Ukraine show, Ivan integrated a copy showing Neville Chamberlain with his peace in our time, when he had negotiated with Herr Hitler,
Yeah.
this guarantee of peace, and the full text of it. And it's very telling at this moment in history to remind people. It says, look what Neville Chamberlain did. He basically sold out the West for what he thought would be peace in our time. And Winston Churchill, after that Munich agreement, said to Neville Chamberlain, said, you had a choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war.
Interesting.
So that the Europeans remember these lessons. They are not blind to the lessons of history. They know this all too well.
I have to ask you something else here too, because Yuri mentioned this in his article this morning too, and he thinks that you've talked about the historical nature of Russia fighting during the winter, and he thinks that Russia is going to really pour it on this winter just because it's winter for no other reason.
No.
Do you think that's true?
No, the reason that that the Russians fought during the winter during World War II was because it was the only except in front of Moscow, when the Germans were just on the outskirts of Moscow, they could see the spires of the Kremlin, but they had overextended themselves.
Yeah,
they were at the very, because the German logistic system was not that much better than the Russians. I mean, they had some motorized capability, but they also had horse-drawn wagons supplying their offensives. They were about 10% motorized. By contrast, the United States, when it invaded France, the United States Army was 100% motorized.
Right.
And Patton's army just went, the Red Ball Express, and they just went back across France faster than the Germans had conquered it in 1940.
Yeah. Well, forgive me, but everyone thought that Hitler moving into Russia in the winter was folly anyway, right?
Yes. As a matter of fact, what this one group of German soldiers that was taken prisoner when the Russians launched their counteroffensive, because they were right next to their supply bases in Moscow, they didn't have to have a significant logistics capability in order to inflict significant casualties and capture Germans. But this one Russian officer who said to a group of German prisoners, "What? Didn't any of you read Caulaincourt?" The book by Caulaincourt, which is the account of Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812, and how devastated the Russian winter was to the invading French army. And so and it turns out one of the German prisoners did have a copy of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. And
I'm assuming that'd be kind of like, I went to school at the University of Miami. That's Miami, Florida. And I remember.
Yes, so I did too. That's where I went to graduate school. So.
You went to graduate school there? Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's where I got my master's and my doctorate.
So if you're down there and you're from the north, I mean, I met students that had never seen snow ever. And just like we were talking before we started here, you were saying it was 27 degrees in Reston today. And I was telling you that
that's shirt sleeve weather for Minnesota people.
Well, it is. I'm sorry. I'm going to bore you now that you brought this up. So I was in Miami. This is, let me see. It's January. I don't remember the actual day, 1977. And it's still, from what I understand, I looked this up recently, the only day in the recorded history of Miami where it snowed. It snowed a quarter of an inch at 6 a.m. And at about 9 o'clock, I went to play tennis because I'm just I got my little short 1970s short shorts on and I got my polo shirt with my U of M, and I'm walking across campus with I just look like a dork. and this woman stops me, and she a co-ed, she's wearing a full mink coat, and she stops me and she says, and to quote her, "What are you, fucking nuts?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "It's freezing out here. Why are you dressed that way?" And then she just plows forward. She says, "Where are you from?" I said, "Minneapolis." And she said, "Oh," and she left. And the reason I bring that up is
I have immunity.
That's right.
This is nothing.
I don't think people who've like never been to Moscow or Minneapolis know how cold it actually gets. You may think you've seen cold. No, you haven't seen cold. That's the thing. You go
and the Germans. Remember, the Germans in World War II when they thought it was going to be a very short war. They thought it would that they would be in Moscow by Christmas.
Yeah.
Or actually that the Russians would surrender before the winter weather set in. It was a huge miscalculation. And as a matter of fact, when the Germans were being surprised by this winter weather, on the home front, the Germans were being asked to send winter clothing to rush winter clothing to the front, so their soldiers wouldn't freeze to death. But they did not. They were not prepared for a winter campaign. Okay. Even so, but the reason that the Russians were able to execute winter offensives during World War II, well, they really had no choice. That was the only offensive they could execute, because they were backed up toward. They were very close to their own supply lines, so they did not have to worry about. And the Germans were at the tail end of theirs. They were overextended. So naturally, any counteroffensive against the Germans would be easier to execute during the winter.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't understand Guri's logic here, because both the Ukrainians and the Russians know about winter weather here. They both know. So why I don't understand why the Russians would come during the winter.
There's no element of surprise there for them. The Ukrainians are the Ukrainians have a fortified line, which the Germans did not have. They had hedgehog defenses. They had point defenses. And Hitler gave a stand fast order. And that, interestingly enough, that prevented the German army from completely collapsing, because otherwise it would have been a rout. But the Ukrainians, they have a solid defensive line in eastern Ukraine. It is able to repel all Russian attacks thus far. Whenever the Russians make any gains, the Ukrainians, who are behind their line of robot drones, they're able to counterattack and eliminate the Russians and inflict very high casualties. And the Russians, they have their what supply lines they have. I mean, they're using mules and donkeys to carry the supplies forward, and it's just pathetic. But the Russians are continuing. They have a very inflexible command system. It is not really they are not really able to improvise.
No.
For example, the American Army, we have something the Russians don't have. We have a professional, non-commissioned officer corps. We have sergeants that are capable of leading and doing the detailed planning for tactical maneuvers, which the Russians do not have. The Russians depend upon their officers to do all of the work that a sergeant would do. In addition to that, when the officer gets killed, the Russian attack breaks down.
This is kind of a stereotype, Joanthan, but it's also just part of capitalism versus communism. It isn't, in the sense that
you could say that
because Americans are good at improvising.
Yes,
we're thinking on our feet. When you're talking about a central an economy that's centrally distributed, everything's supposedly planned. There's no reason to learn how to do that. Yeah,
you're correct. And in the American Army, you are taught. And you were taught during World War II. The Germans observed that he says the reason that the American army is so successful in wartime is that war is chaos, and the American army practices chaos on a daily basis.
They do. Hey, before we go here, I have to ask you about this. This happened last week. Some guy at the EU gave a speech about the fact that they basically think the EU basically thinks the Russians are going to invade Europe, they
have every reason to believe that, because there have been numerous statements by Russian leaders of various kinds talking about how they plan to go beyond Ukraine, and they make no secret of their desire to restore the Russian Empire, or at the very least restore the borders that existed at the end of the Cold War and before the NATO began its de facto expansion eastward, not because NATO wanted to conquer those areas, but because what the Russians don't say is that all of its former Warsaw Pact members, they all wanted to join NATO
Right.
because they knew what would happen.
Right. Okay, but here's my question though to you. Is this also just warmongering in the sense that here's the problem with forever wars, and I don't have to tell you once again, master of the obvious again. There's a whole bunch of people that make enormous amounts of money from people fighting, and so but you're saying that they actually have a legitimate fear here. That this isn't something that somebody's conjured up.
This is enlightened self-interest. They need to deter Russian attack because they have historical memories of how the Russians have treated occupied territories. I mean, when the Soviet army advanced into Germany, it is well documented that the Russian army raped approximately 2 million German women. The Soviet army was told the women of Germany are yours.
Yeah.
And they raped. But the Russian army uses rape as a weapon of war, and that is one of the. It's an ugly. Well, it's not even a secret. It's just something. It's an unpleasant truth.
My mother saw it. I mean, so I know all about this. I've been told about this many times. She lived during the war in Yugoslavia, and that was not pretty. So
nope.
I don't remember. Her and her sister, my grandfather put up a false wall in a closet in their house, and they slept there in that little tiny room, not even a room, on the entire summer, because every night the soldiers are coming by looking to rape girls, so.
And my Russian history professor, Dr. Stephen Spironis, way back in the mid-1975 through 77, and he was the one who advised me. He set me on the path to my present career. He was the one who advised me to delay entry into active duty so that I could go to University of Miami, and starting in 1977, and delay for my master's degree and my PhD.
We were there at the same time.
Yes, we were.
I'll be damned. Huh.
We were on the campus at the same time.
I'll be darned.
How's that for us?
Yeah.
It's really amazing. But he advised me that if I was going to enter into the U.S. Army as an intelligence officer, being the kind of person that I was, essentially a nonconformist, that I had to have an equalizer. I had to have a credential that would back people off. And the way to do that is just to delay not just for my master's, but to delay and get my PhD in international affairs, concentration in Soviet area studies, then enter active duty. He said I would have a credential that no one else could match.
Right.
And he was right. And I was able to advance through the active duty and into the reserves, and eventually made it to colonel. In the latter part in the reserve career, being a college professor in uniform.
Yeah.
So all of that is to say that the interesting part about all of this is that the Russians are. Oh yes, he would say several times I took classes on Soviet Russia and Tsarist Russia, which were very popular, and he was a very popular professor at the University of Tampa, and he would say on more than one occasion, he would say, the Russians are animals. And I thought he was just exaggerating for dramatic effect. And as I read more and more about various aspects, I said he was not exaggerating.
Yeah,
their behavior is practically animalistic.
Yeah, and now they're being run by basically a crazy person.
Yeah, someone who is obsessed with restoring the Russian Empire, and unfortunately, the only way you have to deal with a crazy person is you can't reason him out of it.
No,
you have to knock him down.
Right.
You have to knock him down and render his attack useless. And that, by the way, because he brandishes his nuclear arsenal so much, that is why both President Putin and President Xi have declared that the Golden Dome initiative by President Trump is in their words, highly destabilizing. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't see it as a threat to their existence. They see it as a threat to their power,
Oh yeah,
which to them is even worse.
right.
And it would neutralize their ability to threaten the West, to threaten nuclear escalation with
And
the
I
West.
never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. An offense to their power is actually worse than an offense to their citizenry.
They would rather die.
That's right. Yeah, they would.
And so that is why I would say, and for future discussions, that is why making sure that we correct the potential flaw in the Golden Dome before it comes back to bite us in later years, because right now we are proposing to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on constructing a ballistic missile defense using hundreds of satellites. These contractors are talking about putting up hundreds of satellites. And the thing is, the Russians and the Chinese are concentrating on a counter space capability. They are space denial powers.
Yeah.
We are the space control power.
Right.
They are space denial powers. And the way you have to be able to effectively neutralize their counter space satellites before they can take out our ballistic missile defense satellites.
Well, I tell you what, next time you come on, we'll talk about that, because space is a big deal with me. So I spent a lot of time reading about this. So, yeah.
And you will be talking with the only person who is advocating upgrading the Space Force with a space fleet, and that is what we can discuss, how that would fix the flaw in the Golden Dome.
Right. I think it's almost mandatory. I don't think they even have a choice. But you know,
well, they're going to recognize it soon enough. Especially if you send this podcast to them.
Yes, that's right. I will. Jonathan, we won't be talking to you before Christmas. This is our last week before we take
off. Okay, excellent. Well, in this case, I've got all my Christmas presents bought and sent to various people, and my wife and I are hunkered down here, at least for the early part of this week. Yeah, I'll venture. We'll be going out on Wednesday to Outback, and it'll clear up and stuff. And in the meantime, I am just mightily enjoying the fact that the New Orleans Saints defeated the Carolina Panthers.
Oh, you're a Saints fan?
No, I'm not a Saints fan. I'm a Bucks fan. I'm a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, going all the way back to 1976 when they were 0-14.
Yeah.
And now what the Saints' victory has done is it now puts Carolina and Tampa Bay back in a tie. And so now
if you were on campus the same time I was at the University of Miami, do you remember how bad the University of Miami football team was then?
Oh God, yes.
Oh my God.
Mellenberger. Oh my God.
I think they went 2-14 or something like that one year.
Not quite that bad. It wasn't quite that bad. They had losing seasons though.
Oh, very terrible. Yeah. I mean, I watched a practice once, and I honest to God, I mean, I played in high school. I thought I could walk on here and start. It's like it's like it was just pathetic. It was terrible. And
keep in mind, 1977. That was the same year that the Buccaneers were in the middle of their 0-26 losing streak.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't until towards the tail end of that, 1977, the Buccaneers finally beat New Orleans 33-14 by intercepting 3 passes and returning them for touchdowns. And the defense won that game for them. And then the following week, I was home. My brother Jeff and I got tickets for the last Buccaneers home game of the season, just after they had won their first game. They were going absolutely insane. They welcomed the Buccaneers because the 1977 Buccaneers had arguably, statistically, and I could prove it to you in a separate discussion, they had the worst offense in NFL history.
Oh, okay.
None. They had a playoff caliber defense, but it was shackled to an absolutely horrific offense. But they were so fired up. The Buccaneers were so fired up by their victory, getting their first victory and getting the monkey off their back, that their offense actually came to life. every time the Buccaneers made a first down, the crowd went nuts as if they'd scored a touchdown. That, and never mind then, but the Buccaneers scored 17 points, all with offense on that. And when they scored those touchdowns, the stadium went insane.
I believe it.
You would have thought it was the second coming of Jesus. And to top it all off, they beat the Cardinals 17-7, and at the conclusion of the game, the crowd in the stadium rushed onto the field collectively. They mobbed the Buccaneers. They were hugging. It was absolutely insane.
Unbelievable. Incredible.
And my brother and I were there to watch that. We were taking pictures. Oh my goodness!
It's with your little Instamatic camera.
Oh no! My brother Jeff did not just settle for an Instamatic camera.
Well, he had a big honker, but you didn't have a cell phone.
No, didn't have a cell phone, but he had that big telephoto lens camera,
right?
And he was able to do things like during the '76 season when Steve Spurrier was the quarterback. He took this one picture, beautiful picture, showing Steve Spurrier with the pocket breaking down, and Steve Spurrier's looking for it caught a still of him looking for a receiver, and actually the Buccaneers had a better offense during the 1976 season than they did in 1977, which is weird.
Yeah.
But in any case, I'm celebrating the fact that the Buccaneers have a shot at, once again, taking the NFC South and having a home game, and they will have all of their weapons back, all their offensive players that they've been missing. They've got them all back now, and so now we will see if they can actually put something together.
Yeah, we will. Always a pleasure talking to you. You know that.
Same here.
Yeah.
You have yourself a Merry Christmas. God bless America, as I say on the Ukraine Show.
Yeah.
And then Ivan and Sasha. Sasha says, "Slava Ukraine, glory to Ukraine."
Right. Sasha's a Ukrainian, but he's in Toronto. He's in Canada.
Correct.
What a mix.
Yeah, it is an amazing mix. So anyway, I'll be, as a matter of fact, I've got a program, I've got a podcast on the Ukraine Show tomorrow.
Yeah. And people can find that Ukraine, Russia, China. Right.
Yep. Exactly.
The podcast. Thanks, Jonthan. We'll talk to you. Okay. Have a nice holiday. Our thanks to Jonthan Lockwood for joining us there today. He's always got an interesting take on any sort of military matter. I mentioned this before. They used one of his books at Annapolis as a textbook. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, thanks to him. This is the part 2 of our show. We call it the JimCast. I talk about the news that most other people don't talk about. Now, today, I'm going to start out, and I wasn't planning on doing this morning, but I'm driving around this afternoon. I'm listening to the talk radio. I'm reading comments online, talking about Rob Reiner and his wife getting murdered. And if the latest news, at 9:00 Eastern is that they've arrested his son, and apparently they're keeping him without bail. So I don't know if that's open and shut, but at any rate, the real thing I want to talk about is Trump's remarks about it. And they've been basically condemned by everyone. I haven't heard a single person, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, anybody stand up and support what he had to say. It was basically what he had to say is that Rob Reiner was probably murdered by somebody who had Trump derangement syndrome. And also then today, after this afternoon at a press conference, one of the many he does offhand ad hoc, he also said that he was never a fan of the guy. Christ, he was murdered. No, he didn't. No, Rob Reiner didn't like Trump, and he was very, very upfront about that. but the guy just got murdered, for Christ's freaking sake, by one of his family members, you know? And this is, yeah, people on the radio were talking. I'm listening to Joe Pags and Sean Sean Hannity, and they're talking about, how just basically kind of vile and disgusting these remarks were. But I didn't hear a single person mention this, which is the reason I'm talking about it now. The real thing that bothered me about it, although though they are basically, considering the fact the guy just died, you could have been at least, even if not respectful, not said anything rather than say a bunch of stuff that's negative. But the real thing that bothered me is that Trump made Rob Reiner's death about himself. That's what really bothered me. He's talking about the fact, well, he died because of Trump derangement syndrome, and I mean. And this is the thing. I heard a guy on the radio say this, there's a lot of people that like Donald Trump's policies and the fact that he can seem to actually get stuff done, right? Okay. There's also a lot of people that personally don't like him. I don't know. I'm always been kind of on the fence on that. I don't hate the president personally at all. I don't know if I like him. I kind of don't care. We hire him to do a job. Generally, I think he's done a pretty good job. Generally, there's a few things I don't agree with, but that always happens. You're never going to find a perfect candidate. But God, did you, but Mr. President, I hate to say this, even though you're the leader of the free world, the world still doesn't revolve around you. That's, it was really, really crass, this stuff. And I couldn't let it pass. I just couldn't. And this is coming from like I said, I'm generally a supporter of the president. I've been talking him up for 10 years, but man, sometimes he says some crazy shit. He does, Now, some of it's also, the guy can be incredibly funny and he can be charming when he wants to, actually extremely charming. And then he says vile crap, It's just like, it's one of those things, well, you take the good with the bad, But really, seriously, you made it about you, It's like, I don't know, certainly not everybody who has Trump derangement syndrome deserves to die by any means. This is kind of like Rob Reiner wasn't in the same category as Charlie Kirk, but still, it's kind of the same thing. The guy was murdered. It's like, just leave it. Bless his soul and leave it alone. If you can't say anything positive about him, I didn't know Rob Reiner. The movies are pretty good. He I don't know. I don't want to get into. I don't think he was quite as brilliant a director as some people thought he was, but he was certainly okay. He certainly did a fine job. Does it matter? Nobody deserves to be killed for anything. Like, now, this sounds like I'm making a crazy segue here, but I'm not. Also announced today is that Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow, is going to meet with Candace Owens. I've talked about this on this show before. I don't know if Candace Owens is crazy or if she's crazy like a fox, because I've said the reason she says all this crap is for money. But I just learned something just yesterday. I didn't know this. I'm guessing you didn't know this either. Candace Owens, because of her marriage, because her husband is wildly rich. He's a tech entrepreneur. Apparently, he's worth about $150 million. In other words, she doesn't need the money. So as somebody pointed out, I can't remember. I really literally can't remember who told me this or where I read this, but she's not doing this for money. She's doing this for her ego, and that's even crazier and scarier still. I understand, it's like I've talked about this before. Nicole Wallace has an afternoon talk show on MSNBC. She's a former Republican. Now she says she's an independent. She's gone out of her way to woe the day. She says, I don't know why I became a Republican, because my parents were, or whatever. She worked for she was press secretary for George W. Bush for a couple of years. I've been told, now, like I said, this is third-hand information. I don't know if this is true, but I'm using this as an example. I've been told that she doesn't believe a single thing she says on that television show. That's all performative crap, and she does it because she's got 3 little kids, and you got to put them through school. And years ago, I thought that I would have thought that was disgusting. But as I've gotten older, I'm starting to think, people's first responsibility in the world, in the planet, in the universe is to take care of their family. And if you're gonna, they're probably paying her something like $3 million a year, or something like that. She's getting paid really well. That's my guess based on what I know about the business. If you have to say crap to take care of your family well, maybe that's what you do. I can't get myself to do it, which is terrible. And I'm starting to now. In years ago, I would have thought, oh, I'm on my high horse. Now I think I basically think I'm a coward for not doing that. I gotta admit, it's like I can't get myself to do it. I can't get myself to lie on these shows. I can't get myself to do with Candace Owens and a whole bunch of other people, Nick Fuentes and all these people they do. And I even people I generally think are doing a good job, like Tucker Carlson, even he engages in this. He engages in this occasionally just to get himself back on the news. He says he will say crazy shit. Piers Morgan does the same thing, and I'm starting to wonder. Maybe I'm stupid for not doing this. I can't get myself to do it. I can't. I sit there. I tell you what I think. I usually try to tell you about stuff that you don't hear anywhere else. That's the thing. And God, and I interview people. That's my big thing. All I know is that people there's a lot of really important people like to come on the show, even though my viewership is very high. I know that, and I think it's because they know they're going to get a fair hearing. I think but the reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't know if Erica Kirk first of all is doing the right thing by meeting with Candace Owens. I don't know. I mean, my personal thing is just ignore her. Now I'm talking about her, but I'm a third party here. I don't have anything to do with her. And the other thing is, I wonder if I just wonder if the whole world's going nuts. I'm starting to think there's some mental contagion going on. I can't understand what's the president's saying crazy shit. People are saying crazy shit. People are now getting shot for saying crazy shit. And it's all, none of it makes any sense. Candace, if I didn't know any better, if I didn't know any context, I'd say Candace Owens was crazy. But like I said, I think she's crazy like a fox. I think that's actually what's going on here. But I don't know. All I know is that all of this stuff is clogging up the pipeline of information in the United States so that the average person can't get anything straight at this point. And I've said this before too. I'm convinced about a quarter of the adult population of the United States is basically mentally ill. I'm convinced of that. A whole quarter. I don't know. I don't know how else to put it. And here's another example of what I consider evidence of this. Excuse me. Now, a family has sued OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT, because they claim that one of their family members, this happens to be a son, in his conversations with the ChatGPT encouraged him to kill his mother and then kill himself, and he did that. Now, but I'm thinking, how many people? Now, this is also obviously an extreme case. Not a lot of people are going to kill themselves because ChatGPT tells them to. But the real thing is, it's like we can't think anymore. It's basically like people go to school, and I'm even talking about college, and I'm specifically actually talking about college. No one in college is no longer taught how to think; they're taught what to think. And if you don't know how to think, then if a chatbot on a screen tells you that maybe you should think about killing yourself, you actually listen to it, and that's absurd. You shouldn't. I mean, we know already that that the AIs are notoriously wrong about a lot of things. Now, granted, they're helpful. There's a whole bunch of stuff in life that's really helpful, but not perfect. Everything basically, but you can't. You got to take everything with a grain of salt, including what these bots say. I mean, that's master the obvious stuff, isn't it? Isn't it? I'm starting to think I'm living in in bizarre world here. You know, I I don't know. I don't know what to make of it at all. And speaking of AI, now Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have now started a race. They want to build data centers for AI in space. Now, these data centers, the ones they're building in the United States, they're they're basically standard. Like, Google has data centers all over the world to handle search results, all that sort of stuff. And these things are basically the same data centers, except they're on steroids. They have more chips in them, more servers. They're running hotter. You basically have to build them next to a river to use the river water as a coolant, and they burn up a shitload of electricity. This is the estimate I've heard, and I think this is accurate, is that by 2030, in 5 years, 12% of the electricity used in the entire United States will be used to power AI. 12% of it, 1/8. And so now, so apparently somebody figured out that there's a lot of efficiencies if you actually put these data centers in orbit, because they wouldn't need coolant. You don't need to buy any land. They can transmit the signal to the ground. They would have their own reactors, nuclear reactors, powering them. I mean, that's going to be the trend right now. Microsoft has bought the old 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor, because you may not know this, but there's 2 reactors in that plant. One of them melted down years ago, which was very famous. The other one is still works. They shut it down, but there's nothing wrong with it. They're going to start it back up, and they're going to use that reactor to power Copilot, their AI program. Just thought you'd want to know that. We're going out in space to run the chatbots. Oh my God. And speaking more about out in space, so NASA has a spacecraft called Maven orbiting Mars, or they did anyway, and it's been orbiting Mars for a good 10 years. It's a data gathering and photography satellite that is. I got into. It was put in Mars orbit, I think, in 2014, if I'm right. Well, of course, it orbits Mars, and when it goes behind Mars, and when Mars, the part of Mars that isn't facing Earth, right? It's just orbiting, going around. They temporarily lose contact with it. It doesn't can't send a signal, and that's been happening. I don't know how many times. Probably thousands of times over the last 10 years. It's a very routine thing. On December 6th. It did a standard rotation around Mars. It's called occultation, when it's behind Mars and can't send the signal. And then it either never came back out or it's completely dead. Something happened on the backside of Mars where this thing, if I'm right, I don't think they can even track it, because it's not putting out a signal at all. Well, it's not even putting out what they call a carrier signal, which is just the default dumb signal that everything else rides on. This thing it's kaput, and it's going around Mars, and it just stopped, and it stopped in the middle of its silent part of its transmission. So it's supposed to come back on every time it comes out of orbit, the backside of Mars comes out of orbit, and it didn't. Just thought you want to know that. No, I not Googled. I did ask Copilot. I use Copilot because it's free. It comes from my operating system. I asked Copilot about, there was rumors years ago. This is from the Mars Observer in 1998. And Copilot said, matter of fact, Copilot is almost rude to me. Copilot said, no, this is a conspiracy theory. And of course, that's what I do. But there have been rumors for years. I understand they're not rumors. I thought there was actually like documentation on this about the fact that the Mars Observer never made it to Mars. Basically, it made it almost to Mars orbit. It was just about to go to Mars orbit, and it went completely silent, kaput. And supposedly it wasn't really taking many pictures until it got into orbit, so it only took a handful on the trip there. Um, Supposedly, the last picture that the Mars Observer took in 1998 is classified. They've never released it, supposedly. Now, Copilot says I'm crazy. And so, and like I said, well, okay, I'm arguing with the chatbot now, and that's fine, because I'm not going to call the chatbot crazy, but I'm not going to let the chatbot call me crazy either. But that's been rumored or documented for a long time that supposedly, and of course this is the real rumor part, that the picture that it took is of a flying saucer, that's the last picture it took, staring right at it, and which is almost like, here, you want to go to Mars, F you. Try again, dumbasses. Anyway, so yeah, but no, this happened with the Maven spacecraft just a week ago. They've lost it, and they don't know why, and it ran for 10 years flawlessly. Who knows? Polymarket says that before the end of the month, Donald Trump is going to disclose the fact that extraterrestrials have come to Earth. I don't believe it, but Polymarket, the betting on that in 1 week went up from 6% to 98% that this is going to happen. And I've said, no, it's going to happen between December and January of 28-29. It's going to happen his last month in office. He will probably do it because I think he wants to take credit. Whoever does it is going to be remembered throughout for millennia, let alone, next couple hundred years. And so I think Trump will do it because I think he will like that idea. Now, the weird thing about that, and this is brought up in some of these articles, Trump has said he doesn't believe in extraterrestrial spacecraft or aliens. He says, there's more and more people coming out who are connected to this who says he has been briefed. And my guess is, most people look at Trump and think he's a stubborn son of a bitch, but I actually don't think that. I think he's quite reactive to information. I think that he has seen the evidence and has changed his mind. That's what I think. But I've talked about this many times, but I'm going to mention again. I used to have Jazz Shaw on the show regularly. He was a UFO writer. He passed away about a year ago from cancer. He was on the show many times. And the only thing Jazz and I ever disagreed on was whether the public could handle formal disclosure. And that is the president standing up at a podium and saying, I have some news. We're being visited by extraterrestrials from outer space. And Chaz always thought, he thought that overall the American public could handle this. But I told him this, my take on this is a little more nuanced. My problem isn't the American public. If the president gets up on TV and says this, the world will know. And I think there's a lot of parts of the world that won't be able to handle this at all. God, I'm dragging this into current politics. Look at radical Islamism. Look at it. Trump was going on about how shithole of a country Somalia is, but he's right about that. It is. Somalia has been there's 192 countries on Earth. Somalia makes the list as a single most corrupt country on the planet. That whole country, it barely exists, basically, and so you wonder, when people are used to fending for themselves, but by doing any means necessary, you bring those people in the United States, and what happens? Massive fraud. All right, now I can't remember why I brought that up. Oh, that's good. Good, Jim. Good job. Uh, why did I bring that up? Oh, about the fact that okay, so um, you know, basically, there's about a third of the countries on the planet are 2 to 300 years behind us, and we can barely handle this. I mean, one of the big problems with this whole UFO phenomena is that there are people who simply refuse to believe it. I mean, you get on, hell, me. We post on TikTok, and I'm going to talk about this in a second. The Three Eye Atlas thing that's been going through the solar system about the fact that a lot of people think it may be some sort of alien probe, that it's maybe an artificial construct, an artificial um, orbital device, and so the um, the videos, the shorts from my JimCast where I talk about this on TikTok have gotten thousands of views and more comments than I've ever gotten on any other thing. And the general comments are, "Jim, you're an idiot. It's a comment. Just shut up." Those are the comments basically. That's it. You know. Now, and who is this? This is it's Political Saucer, if I'm right. It's um uh, a Substack newsletter, and this guy writes. He writes very, very, very compellingly. And yeah, you could if you go to it's politicalsaucer.substack.com, you can see it. He wrote a column this weekend where he says that, and the last time I've talked about this, I've said that uh, people are saying it's just a comet, and I've been hearing so many conflicting things. And he said, no, there's 4 things going on here that are completely non-comet like, and he names them. Uh, and let me see if I can remember off the top of my head. I should have written this down. But he talks about the fact that no, there really is something weird going on here. There really is. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer and physicist, he's been talking about this the entire time. I'm starting to get the impression that maybe Avi's discovered that by saying outrageous shit, he can become famous, and he has. So it's worked. One more time, it's like, but the guy who writes Political Saucer says that no, the stuff that Avi's brought up is legit. About the fact that this is not an ordinary saucer. I can name just one thing right off the top of my head about the fact that the tail is going in completely the wrong direction. Usually the tail faces away from the sun, so when the comet goes around the sun, the tail changes direction. Then this thing that the tail is facing toward the sun, and that's complete. That shouldn't happen. It just shouldn't, because this is all based on solar wind and stuff like that, and the solar wind is coming off the sun. So the best explanation anyone has for this is that this thing is firing rocket jets to slow it down. Now the really weird thing is you're thinking, well, okay, if you can fly through space on warp drive, you don't need rocket jets. No, you're still going to use them for small little adjustments, because it's like vinyl records. They're still going to work. And you go even in Star Trek, okay, they had a warp drive, but even in Star Trek, they did their tiny little maneuvers using rocket jets. They did. So that's completely plausible. But yeah, so I don't know what's going on here. I don't. But something there. What I hear is that people are saying. Matter of fact, this strikes me as deliberate disinformation. NASA's always said this crap. They will say anything to get people off the extraterrestrial train. They will. They do not want to deal with this. I don't think they believe it. Uh, there's a weird thing a video taken from the ISS last week or the week before that really. I mean, some of these videos are just kind of stupid, weird lights and shit. Here's the deal. You think, well, Jim, you're in the tank for this. No, unless your thing actually looks like a metal spacecraft. If you see lights, you've seen lights. I don't think that's anything. Well, it could be, but I don't know definitively. But there's this video that the ISS they only got like 3 or 4 seconds of it because as soon as this shit hits the screen, the people in NASA cut the feed off on the video. And I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, well, God damn it, that looks like a spacecraft to me. I don't know what you guys see, but it's like, oh man. At any rate, yeah, this thing is going to come closest to Earth. I think it's March 16th, is it? And NASA is training all the big guns on it, all the big telescopes. The Jupiter orbiter is going to be looking. They have all sorts of satellites all over the solar system that they're going to point right at because people want to find out what this thing is. But I don't know, it's going to be really interesting. And finally, and I put this in the description for the show tonight, this is really important about the fact that at Johns Hopkins University, they've done a study that says that smelling your own farts can not only boost your brain power, but it can even stave off Alzheimer's. There you go. I said it. Smelling your own farts. You're not other people's farts, yours, your own. Your own. So you gotta, lock yourself in a small room and eat a bunch of beans. Okay? All right, I want to thank you guys for watching. Now tomorrow night we got Gregory Wrightstone from the CO2 Coalition, and we're going to do open phones tomorrow night. And I got to look here. I can't remember what I'm doing. You want that's Tuesday, right? Wednesday we have Julian Hagman and Corinne Clifford. Corinne's been on. This is going to be your second time on the show. She's a White House reporter, independent, but she's in the room on a regular basis, and I get the scoop and all the gossip from her. And then that's Wednesday. And Thursday, Leslie Corbley is going to be here, author and poet, and Santa. We're doing open phones tomorrow night. So you want to call up after Gregory Wrightstone after his interview. We're going to do open phones. You can call and talk to me. Numbers 325, call Jim, 325-225-5546. Love to hear from you. That's tomorrow night. But tonight, we're done. Thanks to Jonathan Lockwood once again. Thanks to you for watching. Really appreciate it. Good night, Uncle Donnie, wherever you are. And good night to you, wherever you may be. I'll see you tomorrow night, folks. Take care.